I know there are women, like my best friends, who would have gotten out of there the minute their boyfriend handed them a gun to hide. But I didn't. I have to admit the truth. It turned me on. That is Karen Hill, in Goodfellas, looking straight down the lens and telling you the most honest thing anyone in that entire film ever says. She is talking about the night the man she was about to marry crossed a quiet suburban street, grabbed a neighbor by the hair, and beat him bloody in his own driveway with the barrel of a pistol, because the man had put his hands on her. Then Henry walked back across the road, still breathing hard, and pressed the warm gun into Karen's hands and told her to make it disappear. And she did. In real life, she hid it in a milk box outside the house, the little insulated box the milkman still filled in 1965. And she stood there on Long Island in the dark holding a weapon that had just split a man's scalp open. What she felt, standing there, was not fear. For most of 2 hours, that movie asks you to watch this same woman get slowly trapped, seduced, then cornered, then dragged under. A nice Jewish girl from the suburbs who married a monster and drowned inside his life. That is the version you remember. It is the version Lorraine Bracco earned an Academy Award nomination for playing. But the real Karen Friedman told the reporter who spent years interviewing her something quieter than that famous movie line. And in a way, it is worse. She did not say it turned her on. She said, and I am quoting her, "I was really excited. I loved that Henry had done all this for me. It made me feel important." The movie took one honest feeling and sharpened it into a slogan. The truth was softer in the words and harder in what it predicted. Because a gun in the milk box was not the moment Karen got trapped. It was the moment she signed on. The version you have not heard is the one where she is not the prisoner of this story at all. If you had asked anyone in Lawrence, Long Island, in the early 1960s, what would become of Karen Friedman, they would have told you she was going to marry a professional. This was the Five Towns, comfortable middle-class Jewish Long Island, and Karen was a dental assistant with 2 older sisters, Sandy and Adrienne, and a mother who had firm opinions about the kind of man her daughter would bring home. The young men Karen was supposed to end up with were studying to become accountants and dentists. She had a word for them, years later, when she talked to the writer Nicholas Pileggi. She called them schmendricks, little nothings, nice, safe, and boring enough to put you to sleep at the table. Then came the double date. In the movie, Tommy sets it up and sulks through it. In real life, it was arranged through Paul Vario, the Lucchese capo regime who was Henry's protector, and the 4th seat at the table was Vario's own son. They met at the Villa Capra, a restaurant run by a connected man named Frankie Manzo, and the first date went so badly that Henry did not bother to show up for the second one. And here is the first thing the movie cannot quite bring itself to show you plainly. Karen did not feel relieved to be rid of him. She was insulted. She went hunting for him, found him, and tore into him in the middle of a cab stand for standing her up. A girl who was frightened of these men would have taken the missed date as a gift from God. Karen took it as a challenge. She wanted back in. What she wanted back into, she described better than any screenwriter ever could. Listen to how she put it to Pileggi. He could go places, she said. He had money. He was an action guy. There she was, going out with these little accountants, and here was Henry, who took her to the Copacabana and sat her at a ringside table while a bottle of champagne arrived from Sammy Davis Jr. a few seats over. And people always looked at me, Karen said, and wondered, who is she? That is not the testimony of a woman being tricked. That is a woman naming the drug and telling you exactly why she took the first hit. So let me put the whole video's argument on the table right now, because everything that comes after it is evidence. Goodfellas frames Karen as a captive. The record shows a willing partner who was pulled toward the exact danger the movie treats as her cage. Her daughter Gina said it later in the family's own memoir, in one sentence that does more work than the entire film. Most girls would have been terrified, she wrote, but my mom said she thought it was sexy. The gun in the driveway did not scare Karen off. It closed the sale. And that leaves exactly one question worth asking about this woman, so I am going to put it to you now, while the video is still young, because it is going to keep arguing both sides of it whether you like the answer or not. She was 19 years old. The most exciting man she had ever met beat someone half to death in front of her, and then handed her the weapon and asked her to hide it, and she felt important. Was that the moment a normal person should have run, or the moment Karen found out who she actually was? If it had been you standing in that driveway at 19, holding that warm gun, would you have hidden it or dropped it and walked? Tell me in the comments, because that argument is the entire story. And if you are new here, subscribe. I pull these from the interviews and the court record every single week, and there is a lot more of this one to come. Now watch how fast the thrill hardens into the job. They eloped to North Carolina on August 26, 1965, where the marriage laws were looser and Karen's disapproving parents could not get in the way. And then they came home and did it properly with a Jewish ceremony and a room full of Henry's crew. Her mother had called Henry that gangster to his face. When Henry claimed he was converting to Judaism to smooth things over, Karen's grandmother fussed over him like a son. Henry later admitted he never really converted. He lied about it, the way he lied about everything, and Karen learned early to hear that kind of lie and let it pass, because that is the real skill this life demanded of her, and she named it herself, and it is the single most revealing thing Karen Hill ever said. Life just became normal, she told Pileggi. I know it sounds crazy, but it all happened so gradually, day by day, so that you are going along before you know you have changed. Read that slowly, because that sentence is the whole psychology of the thing. Nobody handed Karen a contract. There was no single morning where she chose the criminal life over the honest one. It arrived by the inch. A little swag here, a little cash there, a husband who was never home, and a lifestyle nobody could explain. Until one day the abnormal was just the temperature of the room and she could not remember it being any other way. And the life was good to her. In the shabby, stolen way, it was good to all of them. The wives, Karen said, went to the supermarket in Mink. The trucks backed up to the garage and unloaded microwaves and toaster ovens and cartons of clothes that had fallen off the back of something. When Henry and his partners robbed a restaurant called the Suite of its Fixtures, it was Karen who sold them off. She said so herself, and she said it like a woman still keeping a grudge, because she sold those stolen fixtures to a big shot named Jerry Asaro, and he never paid her a dime. Sit with that image for a second, because it does something no movie voiceover does. This is not a frightened housewife averting her eyes from her husband's crimes. This is a woman running a fence operation out of her own address and getting stiffed on the invoice. You could not wait for a handout, Karen said of that whole world. That was the general attitude. Her mother saw all of it, and said the only sane thing anyone said in the entire saga. Normal people don't live this way. Karen heard her mother say it, and did the math, and chose Henry anyway. I was going to be as stubborn as she was, Karen said. I was not going to give him up. I was not going to prove her right. Then Henry went to prison, and the marriage got its first real test, and Karen failed it in the most telling possible direction. In 1974, he drew a stretch for extortion, and served a little over 4 years of it inside Lewisburg. The movie shows you Karen suffering on the outside, and she did suffer, but watch what her suffering actually consisted of. She was the supply line. According to Pileggi, who interviewed her directly, Karen would buy a brassiere several sizes too large and a pair of knee-high boots too big for her feet, and she would pack them full of drugs and contraband and walk them straight through the prison gate on visiting day, because the guards barely searched the wives. Henry later bragged that he had paid the guards off so his wife could carry the load in clean. So the respectable dental assistant from the Five Towns became a drug mule for a federal penitentiary, and she did it over and over, and she did it with her small daughters in the back seat. Because that is the detail that finishes off the Babe in the Woods reading of Karen Hill for good. Her son remembered those trips from the passenger seat. His mother would wake the girls at 3 in the morning, pack the dolls and the blankets and the pillows and the medicine, and drive along the turnpikes for something like 6 hours to reach the prison by the time visiting started. A child rode shotgun to help keep her awake. Then she carried the drugs in past the guards, sat with her husband, and drove the whole way home. A victim does not learn which boots hide the most weight. A victim does not run that route at dawn with her kids asleep behind her. Karen was not being dragged through this life with her eyes closed. She was solving its logistics. But something did break in her during those prison years, and it was not her nerve. It was her faith in the code. Because while Henry sat inside, The crew he had bled for did not take care of his family. The envelopes stopped coming. The men who had toasted the wedding were suddenly hard to reach, and the bar tabs and debts they owed Henry went unpaid, while his wife counted change. Karen showed up on visiting days and complained about exactly that, and Henry got angry with her for complaining, and neither of them said the true thing out loud, so Karen said it later, to Pileggi, and it is one of the coldest, cleanest lines in the whole book. She had read about how these men supposedly take care of each other when one of them is inside. She had never once seen it happen in real life. If they don't have to help you, she said, they won't. Hold on to that sentence, because loyalty in that world was a bill every one of them signed at the wedding, and none of them ever intended to pay, and Karen learned that in a prison visiting room years before she got to use it. When the moment came to collect, she collected in a way none of them saw coming. She could have left then, facing the plain fact that the family was a fiction and the money was unreliable, and her husband would vanish behind a wall for years at a stretch. Plenty of women would have taken the children back to Lawrence and started over. Karen did not. She waited. She held the whole thing together from the outside, and she waited for him to come home. And when he did, the money came roaring back, and so did everything that rode along with it. The everything included the other women. The film compresses Henry's affairs into the mistress Janice Rossi, and hands Karen the single most explosive scene she gets, and it is worth telling straight, because the truth of it inverts everything the movie wants you to believe about her helplessness. When Karen found out, she did not dissolve. She found the mistress's apartment building, marched up to it with her children in tow, and leaned on every buzzer on the intercom panel, announcing into the speaker that the woman in that apartment was nothing but a whore, and that Henry was her husband, and this woman had better go find her own. It is the loudest, least victimized act a human being can perform. On screen it reads as a breakdown. Knowing what you now know, watch it again, and it reads as ownership. I felt used, was all Karen would say about the affairs afterward. But she did not let go of 1 inch of the life. She defended her stake in it at the top of her lungs, and the stake had gotten very large. There were furs and jewelry and dinners out and brand new Buick Rivieras sitting in the driveway and closets that would not close for all the new clothes, and the source of every bit of it went politely unasked. That is the quiet arithmetic under the whole marriage. You do not ask where the money comes from when the money is this good. You train yourself not to hear the question. Karen trained herself well. Then the business changed, and the change poisoned everyone's luck at once. In December of 1978, Henry's crew was tied to the robbery of the Lufthansa cargo terminal at Kennedy Airport, nearly $6 million in cash and jewelry, the largest cash theft in the country up to that day. And the thing about a score that big is that it does not buy safety. It buys visibility, and it turns every man who knows a detail into a threat to every man who knows the rest. One by one, the people around that heist began to disappear. The money that was supposed to be freedom quietly became a countdown clock. By then, Henry was neck-deep in the one business the bosses had expressly forbidden, and it was the thing that finally sank the family, and Karen was in it with him. He was moving cocaine and using it, and the household reorganized itself around the product. Her daughter Gina remembered the parties, and remembered strangers using her own Miss Piggy mirror, a little girl's toy, to cut lines of coke on. This is not the movie softening Karen. This is her own children remembering the floor of the house. When the end came for all of it, it did not arrive as a gunshot in a doorway. It arrived as a knock, and a helicopter, and a wife who knew exactly what to do. By March of 1980, the drift had become a free fall. Henry was moving cocaine on almost no sleep, convinced a helicopter was tailing him across Queens, and the film renders that entire day with surgical precision and dates it May 11th, 1980. The real arrest had come weeks earlier, on April 27th, and the movie compresses the timeline for its own rhythm, but the scene inside the house is true to what the family described for years: federal agents at the door, and Karen, in the few seconds before they came through it, doing the one thing that could still save her husband. She ran to the bathroom and flushed the cocaine, something like $60,000 of it, down the toilet, and she took a pistol and pushed it down into her underwear where no agent was going to search. It left them broke inside a single minute. It also kept Henry off a charge that could have buried him for the rest of his life. Think about the reflexes that requires. Those are not the reflexes of a hostage. Those are the reflexes of a partner who has rehearsed this in her head, who knows where every gram is and precisely how fast it has to be gone. And somehow it gets worse for the movie's version of her, because after all of it, after the mule runs and the fencing and the flush, the film still needs you to see Karen as the one being acted upon. Now the movie gives Karen one last famous image, and I want to be honest about it, because this audience checks these things and so do I. There is a scene where Karen climbs on top of the sleeping Henry, presses a gun into his face, and asks him if he loves the other woman, then narrates that she could not pull the trigger and could not leave him either, because she was more frightened of losing him than of anything the gun could do. That scene is the single cleanest picture of her psychology in the entire film. And there is no primary source that says it literally happened. It is Scorsese dramatizing a truth the record supports in 100 other ways. And the truth is this: Karen Hill was bound to this man by something stronger than safety and stronger than sense. There is a name for the thing the movie is drawing in that bedroom. The therapist Patrick Carnes gave it a term: the betrayal bond, the attachment that forms not in spite of fear and chaos, but because of them, welded together by danger and money, and the occasional rush of being chosen, tightened every time the person you love makes you afraid, and then makes you feel safe again. Pileggi, who is no clinician but who sat across from Karen for a very long time, put it more plainly. She found him thrilling, he said, for whatever wiring she had between her ears. He turned her on. He was an exciting guy. Everything Karen did, the milk box and the boots full of contraband and the buzzer and the flush and the staying, was the behavior of a woman who had fused her whole self to the most dangerous man in the room and could no longer find the seam where the fear ended and the wanting began. Which brings us to the flip, and to that unpaid bill finally coming due. Cornered by the April arrest, and marked for death by his own friends over the drugs and the Lufthansa fallout, Henry ran the only math left on the board. He became a government witness. He signed his cooperation agreement with the Federal Organized Crime Strike Force in the late spring of 1980, and the whole family, Karen and both children, went into the Witness Protection Program. And here the record pays off that sentence I told you to hold. The same crew that would not lift a finger for Karen when Henry was inside Lewisburg was the crew she now helped him testify against. The men who taught her that loyalty was a fiction got the fiction turned back on them, under oath, in a federal courtroom. If they don't have to help you, they won't. She had learned that lesson in a visiting room years before. Henry cashed it in front of a jury, and Karen had handed him the reason. And you should know exactly where Karen stood in the eyes of the law at that moment, because this is where I have to be careful and precise is better than dramatic anyway. There is no public record that Karen Hill was ever charged, indicted, or convicted of a single crime. When Henry flipped, Karen and the children entered protection as his family, not as defendants. The prosecutor who handled the whole case, Edward McDonald, plays himself in the movie and delivers one improvised line to Karen that turns out to be the truest thing a lawman says in the film. "Don't give me the babe in the woods routine, Karen," he tells her. "I have listened to those wiretaps." McDonald believed she knew. He said as much. And she was never prosecuted anyway. The government listened to the tapes, decided Karen Hill understood precisely what her household was, and let her walk into protection unindicted. Which was either the luckiest thing that ever happened to her, or the thing that trapped her forever, depending on how you count it. Goodfellas ends more or less there, on the safety of protection and Henry's rueful little speech about becoming an average nobody, an ordinary schnook who orders spaghetti with marinara sauce and gets egg noodles and ketchup. It is a tidy, almost gentle ending. It is also a lie of omission, because protection did not save this family, and it did not fail because the mob hunted them down. It failed because Henry could not stop being Henry. He kept committing crimes inside the program, kept using, kept dealing. And in 1987 he was convicted of cocaine trafficking in federal court in Seattle, and the marshals threw the entire family out of witness protection altogether. The safe ending the movie, grants them evaporated in real life. They had already been shuffled from Omaha, where their very first meal in hiding was at a Godfather's Pizza, and even the children caught the joke, to a small town in Kentucky, to the suburbs of Seattle, a family with no name and about $1,500 a month, and the anonymity slowly finished what the money had started. The children grew up watching their father rage and their mother absorb it. At one point, Karen's own son cracked one of Henry's ribs trying to stop him from beating her. That is where the thrill in the driveway finally led. Not to a ringside table, to a rented house in a state she had never chosen, holding a marriage together with her hands, while her teenage son stood between her and her husband. Karen finally filed for divorce in 1990. It would not be finalized until 2002. 12 years to kill a marriage, neither of them could quite finish off. Henry, characteristically, had secretly married another woman years earlier, while still legally wed to Karen, which tells you everything about how much the vows had ever meant to him. He spent his last decades as a minor celebrity, doing interviews and trading on the movie and drinking, and he died on June 12, 2012, of heart trouble his own long habits had earned him. He was 69, and Karen, the dental assistant from Lawrence who hid the gun in the milk box because it made her feel important. As far as the public record shows, she is still alive today, an old woman in her 80s, living under a name that is not Karen Hill and not Karen Friedman, in a place she has never disclosed to anyone. She has given almost no interview in her own voice in 40 years. Her whole story reaches us secondhand, through the reporter she confided in and the children who wrote the parts she never would. And so the life that promised her the Copa and the mink and the ringside table where everyone turned to ask, "Who is she?" delivered her, in the end, to the one address where nobody will ever ask that question again. It was like a death, Karen said of going into hiding. She was right, only it was a slower one than she meant. The movie asked you to feel sorry for a woman who got trapped. The record shows you a girl who was handed a loaded gun at 19 and hid it because it thrilled her, and everything that came after was only the interest on that one honest feeling, coming due year after year until there was nothing left to collect. Somewhere out there tonight, she is an old woman with a false name and a lifetime of stories she can never tell a neighbor, and the gun she was so proud to hide in that milk box went off, slowly, quietly, for the rest of her life.